Hello all, good morning. Today I'm going to talk about the Law and Economics Concept and Tools lecture. This is actually the second lecture in the series. Welcome back, all of you, once again, and let's talk about the concept and tools today. This is in continuation to the example which we had discussed as the lecture, the first lecture, and where we had in fact talked about the way of thinking, that is how an economist do think when there is a legal question or when there is a case comes in such a so that is actually the fundamental example which we set up in order to understand the difference between how do a lawyer think and an economist in fact think, though it may not be very well go with the logic of others and most of the lawyers, but some lawyers in fact do think in this line. For example, in it's not in the United States. For example, as I said, the first book on law and economics was written by Richard Posner. So Richard Posner is an economist who thought he's also a circuit judge in the Seventh Circuit judge of the United States Circuit Court of that is Seventh Circuit Court of United States, and that is actually a higher court. It is not the county or the district state court. It is above the state court. It is just below the federal Supreme Court. So he used to have a logic which is in fact in line with what we said. So the example of Friedman makes a lot of sense. That is, when you have a very high degree of punishment for even a higher degree, crime, such as robbery, then the armed robbery plus murder comes with a marginal incentive rather than a marginal disincentive, which is actually against the very principle of deterrence deterrence under criminal law, because most of the time what is criminal laws most the main intent is to deter the crime. So in order to deter the crime, if they give a higher sentence, what is actually the effect is a very obvious result. That is like saying that if you give more if armed robbery with a higher degree of punishment, then again armed robbery with murder comes even less, because the marginal cost of basically killing a person is actually minimal in that context. So logically speaking, it is very difficult to comprehend that what if you do, or what disincentivize the person not to do such a heinous crime even they were raiding or conducting a robbery. So in that, this is something which opens a lot of room to think about the possibilities of punishment and the extent of punishment which we discuss. So this is why this discussion is very, very important. That is also connected with our introductory lecture on the decision making of the robbers, or the administration or the judiciary, who is supposed to abort different kinds of punishment in that regard. So we will discuss these things in crime and punishment very in a detailed fashion. So now this is not the whole story, as we proceed with. That is, the law themselves has to come from somewhere. Now the point is that if I am saying that this is something to do with the existence or the emergence of the law, or the institution which we talk, that institution is also part of a decision making process which we all involved. So that is what the whole point which we need to do. So normally we say that the laws are black and white, and it is something which is given to us, etc. But I think this is not a complete story. That is not the whole story which we need to really subscribe. The real story is that laws also comes from within. That is what, like, the early lecture I was referring to, that was in the two examples which we discussed, that is whaling example and the example of hawkers and vending. So hawking and vending is actually the interest of the people themselves. So the law has to come from within. Same the case with whaling, where we have seen three norms, or three locally developed norms become later the very pillar of whaling industry or whaling itself. So that itself means that the laws are not actually emerged from somewhere outside. So that is the whole point. So if that is the case, then we have to really think about how these laws are derived, or how that derived laws are, whether that derived laws are efficient or not. In our system, new laws are passed by the legislature and interpreted by judge. It is very clear in India. You have a judiciary, you have executive, and you have a legislature, assembly as part of the Indian constitution, which gives the powers of different kind. So in that sense, laws are being legislated in the legislative assembly or parliament in India. So these laws are, that means these laws are actually brought by people, not actually given by somebody else from outside. So now that laws has to be interpreted by the judges in India, especially Indian US. We have similar kind of legal system, which is the common law legal system, which I said in the earlier lecture. And that legislature judges are people who respond to incentives like anyone else. So this is also very important, because if you observe any sort of a Supreme Court or a High Court or verdict, then what we see is that this irrespective of the black and white, it is also reflective of the will of the judges who hires, and their incentive. Their incentive in an idealistic sense is always lay upon the benefit of the society. So that benefit of the society itself is actually comes as an incentive for the lawyer. That incentive has to be actually taken care of. So if we give a higher social incentive, then that would be a better law, but not necessarily is the best law. So why? Because it leaves it give a leeway to somebody who get worse off also. So we will discuss that eventually. Similarly, the legislation of the law itself in the parliament or in the legislative assembly, that is also reflective of all this kind, because the person who bring the bill or pass the party who is actually supports, they have their own specific interest. So that specific interest is also, we believe that the people's interest, which they largely constitute or represent. So in that sense, it is also been a reflective content. With that content is called the incentive, incentive behind the legislation of that particular piece of law. So these are basically then connected with that of the incentives which people have. So legislature and judge also come from somewhere. Legislators are elected and judges are elected or appointed, and voters themselves respond to incentives as well. So similarly, if now the person who is going to enact or legislate the law, they come from a specific set, that is, they've been elected or appointed, or so that they have an interest, as well as the people who are going to elect them also has interest. So that is also going to be reflective in this legislations. All this is done within a system specified in constitution of some sort. So if in India, if it is in India, then that is actually based on different provisions in the constitution in India. If it is in the US, the same sort is actually applied. That is the appointment of, for example, the judges in the collegium. Then the collegium will decide. The collegium is nothing but it is also an body which has been formulated by its own mechanism. So that is now there is a big debate in India happening that whether the collegium's power is being signed by the legislature or the collegium is actually independent of it. So there are many discussions and evolvement or evolution of all this kind of institution in every country. So my intention is not actually debate on that, but it has been evolved in that sense. It is actually evolved within. So it is not something as we think that it has comes from elsewhere. So which is itself outcome of some sort of a process. What does we mean by this? That the whole idea of evolution of a law or a norm or any sort and the legal system itself is actually based depend on certain process of society, and that this is all fascinating stuff for political economists, political scientists, constitutional scholars, legal philosophers, historians, and indeed for us also it is interesting because we are also going to deal with, because in the evolution of law, and there are many people such as for example Coulter had done an extensive work on the efficient law, the evolution of an efficient law. So there are a couple of people, I mean a lot of people had worked on this aspect indeed. So does it then the question comes is that are we not going to discuss all this, or is it actually outside the scope of this class? In my mind it is all comes in, but it will also lead us to a very different set of discussion. So what we do is that in a very confined law and economics lecture we cannot deal all this together simultaneously in the lecture. So we put all these questions aside, and what we do is actually we strictly stick upon our mission of law and economics itself, that typical tools and understanding and the evaluation of different legal system only at this point. And in a very detailed lecture, if somebody request, we can also have a discussion on that. So in addition to these things, other than the law can influence people's behavior, there are also now I said that laws are being enacted or evolved through legislation to interpretation of the judges or the judicial institution, or there are institutions such as laws or certain sort of what we call as informal laws, that is also evolves, and that is also have a similar footing in the behavior of individual. For example, Robert Ellickson, in a book titled Order Without Law, How Neighbors Settle Disputes, argue that often people behavior depends on not only the law itself but on social norms, like what it is believed to take to be a good neighbor. So this is not an aberration or a sort of exaggeration. Similar kind of work has been even done. Abner Grief's paper on the Maghreb traders is an excellent work as a extension of this thing. That is, earlier people think that only the contract makes formal contract make things binding and doable, but there are certain communities across the world, do business across the world without any sort of written contract. The example is actually the Maghreb traders, which he was they were conducted business all across the continent, like in Africa, Asia and Europe. So all this trading they were doing is purely based on a social norm. That is, the traders have a belief that if they commit something, then they will be doing. If they can't, then their what you call the people whom inherit their business, they supposed to do. So it is like a kind of a family or a business tree. That business tree always follows certain norms. That norms are called the confidence of business. That confidence of the business comes from the trust which they create within themselves. So same is actually what is prophetically arguing by Robert Ellickson in the paper, in the book Order Without Law, and indeed this is also turned as a paper in the journal. So that is a wonderful piece of writing about how social norms are very very important in the life. The same is actually a question which was posed, very interesting question posed by Kaushik Basu in way back in 1983. One of the article appeared in APW, where he was actually talking about why people are not running away from not paying taxi fares once they reach the destination, or why the taxi drivers are actually why they are not running away once if it is actually paid upfront before actually taking the traveler. So these are the questions which somebody has to really think of, because what they are trying to say is that social norms are very important as far as the behavior of the, it is as important as the law, which in fact influence the interest of the people. This is what in the first lecture I was trying to say. This is not new conceptualization done by either Kaushik Basu or Robert Ellickson, but the same logic has been actually tried to be presented as well as inculcate into our own sensibility by Adam Smith himself, because in the theory of moral sentiments he was roughly speaking about this. People has to have a sort of sentiments to do the transaction, not necessarily the economic, all kinds of transaction, all kinds of their attitude and behavior and their social life, etc., depends on certain sentiments. So that sentiments is a priori to what they are supposed to do it. So now in the later half he wrote about book on Wealth of Nation, which is actually preceded by the moral sentiments lecture. So that moral sentiments is very important to do business. So you don't for example, in the economic transaction we say that A transact commodity to B, or A and B transact commodity between each other, but at the same time it is also mentions that A is not going to snatch the things which is transacted to B. So this is a kind of norm which is what everybody follows. So this is very important. So that kind of thing is actually the basis, forms the basis of the economic transaction. Same is actually the thing which we deal under the law and economics, and then the law and economics again. In the law and economics literature we talk about formal institution, whereas the informal institutions such as what Ellickson talked about is also forms a very important role. So it might choose not to speed even if I am not liable to hitting a person. Suppose if there is no liability exit, we will discuss this is also in the real life example. If suppose there is no law or there is no liability rule per se exist in a place where you don't actually choose to have a super speed. Why? Even if you are not liable for hitting, because speeding is perceived as being thoughtless and rude, or because if I did hit someone I might not be liable, but I would worry about being ostracized by others. So there are so many things which we have to keep in mind. Nonetheless, we will be examining the effect and the law has an outcome, assuming that people do indeed take the law into consideration when it decides how to act. So, and we will mostly be looking at law as if they fell from sky, but I also know that there is the previous slide which we referred is actually speaks about the process is which evolves, but our concern is not the process. So now we see that it is already been evolved based on an efficient structure, or whatever the fairer structure or justifiable structure which it indebted to. And once it is been there, then also it has an influence on the behavior. So we that is why the statement is important, that is, we will mostly be looking at laws as if they fell from the sky, not worrying about where they come from, just taking them as given and examining the incentive they create and the effects that they will have. So with this, now let's move towards the economic assumptions and premises. So normally people respond incentive would be formed as, the first assumption, like we say that in the economics, people selfish, for example. There is also a disintegrated form of the selfishness, but not to say so much on selfishness, but people respond to incentive. So law is a method of creating incentive so as to order society to further social goal. So again, what is actually the goal of law, or what is law itself? Law is a method of creating incentive so as to order society further. So because a law itself is in this context act as an incentive, and people do respond towards that incentive. Both go well together, and economics provide both theoretical and empirical technique for examining laws like likely and actual effect in the world. And so the discourse, to discourage a particular activity, law should increase the price for engaging in the activity. For example, by increasing the sanction of engaging in undesirable behavior, or by increasing monitoring and enforcement of undesirable activity. We have already seen we will be seeing in the crime and punishment lecture, it is in a very extensive form. Similarly, it is the case with the stranger's accident or the tortious case, or similar things have been also discussed with people who contract, and when to breach a contract, and whether the contract can at all broke, or whether we can breach the contract. So is it efficient? So the question which we ask, is it efficient to breach, or anything which we so these kind of questions normally we talk about, and that question is trying to say that the monitoring or enforcement of undesirable activity. So this is what we do with it. And if legal sanction increase or become more likely, people will consume less of the sanction triggering activity. One of law's function is to encourage efficient use of society's scarce resource. And there are other functions of law, such as doing justice and redistributive income and wealth, and sometimes efficiency must give way to the other functions also. So we will discuss partly that. Because in the Postnerian framework of law and economics, Postner himself wrote a book which is titled Justice as Efficiency. So everything is efficient. That is what is his view. But there are many people who contended this view that everything cannot be efficient, or justice cannot be efficient, or need not be. So, for example, the New Haven's concern. New Haven is actually the Yale School people, the scholars from Yale University. They had a very different perspective of the same. That is, legal versus equitable remedy. Use legal remedy when, according to the New Haven School, what they argue for is actually fairness is different, and efficiency is different, and of course justice is different. And all this is having its own mechanism. So legal versus equitable remedy, use legal remedy when transaction costs happen. So they made a proposition that when we have to use legal remedies when transaction costs are high. That is, court acts to clear a hypothetical market, and when equitable remedies are applied, that is when if and only if transaction costs are low. So that is a proposition which they made, that let the parties themselves use bargaining to assign legal entitlements. This is what is their understanding. And more recent work suggests that liability rules are efficient in a very broad range of circumstances, including those of low transaction cost. So institutional again, these are the proposal which is little bit or slightly different to that of what is the Pusnerian understanding, but anyway this is all synchronized one or the other way in the larger or the broader perspective of law and economics literature. So these are not standalone, these are all part of the law and economics literature. Let us also discuss about institutional concerns we need. There are many schools of thoughts which is talks about whether the law or legal system is being efficiently understood. So efficient institution view is one of the view. It talks about institution may matter for economic outcome, but society will choose the institution that maximize their total surplus. How this surplus will be distributed among different groups or agent does not affect the choice of the institution. This is what is actually the perspective which was developed by efficient institutional view. Institutional view is actually a set of understanding which is again a parallel to the law and economics, which, or to say that it's a broader concern than the law and economic specificities. Whereas this Douglas North and many people had pioneered all this understanding. Social conflict view is another set of understanding where institutions are not always chosen by the whole society and not for the benefit of the whole society, but by the group that control political power at this time, perhaps as a result of conflict with other groups demanding more rights. So this is also part of understanding which is connected with the devolution of the institution and the perspective on institution by different understanding. So different scholars in this concern. And the third set of understanding is institutions being treated as ideology or belief view. According to this view, society may have different institutions because people have different belief about what is best for society. And the fourth and final one is incidental institutional view, where they perceive that a different approach which downplay choices and emphasizes the development of institution as a byproduct of the social interaction is more popular among many political scientists and sociologists. So there are many people who try to advocate one or the other institution and or the combination of all this. So we again try to see this is because there are institutional structure which is always an interactive one of what we speak. As I said earlier, we don't go to the details, the process and siding of which one is good, or because that is outside the scope of this course, because that itself will take a very different series of lectures. So let us hint some of this problem and glimpse. It is actually only a glimpse of what in the larger spectrum it is existed or existing. So developmental versus predatory institutions are being the views which people try to understand, where suppose if you consider these are the things which is on the left side: strong state, institutional, different development, agreement on institution, which view of institution. The other thing is actually the four different things which we have discussed: Hobbesian theory, social conflict theory, grabbing hand, Weberian theory. So in that, what is the role of state? Hobbesian theory say that the role of state is good. It is important. That is, the Leviathan is the most important, or the Leviathan is often inevitable because people are brutish, nasty and selfish. So this is what is a kind of understanding. So therefore in order to correct or in order to guard and guide them, you need a third party. So this is what is a Hobbesian understanding about the state. Whereas the social conflict view is on state, role of state is ambiguous. We can't say it because there is always a conflict of interest exists. Therefore, you can't say that the Leviathan is a good person or a bad, or the very system of governance is good or bad. Whereas grabbing hand, you say that categorically state is bad because any third party is actually grabs. From an idealistic point of view, if two person can take care of everything, then there is a third person exists, means then the third person is going to actually share your thing. So for them, state is a very bad institution. So, but Weberian's theory or sociologists try to say that the state is a very good system, just like the Hobbesian understanding. So institutional difference, then if on the institutional difference, again these three theories have different perspective on institutional differences. So the Hobbesian theories or theorists try to say that accidental or cost of institutional design. They say that of course institutional difference is accidental and there is always a cost involved in that. And social conflict theories are due to economic incentive of various groups this institution derives. So it is based on an incentive of individual level or a group level. So again, grabbing hand theory accidental, but they say strength of bureaucracy. They say that it is because of the again they will be having a sort of consensus like it is an accidental view. Accidental institutional difference is always accidental, and it is that often been strengthened by the bureaucracy. Again, Weberian, since it is again accidental, that is institutional differences are accidental. So developmental institution is people now. This is where these questions are important because these days developmental institutional discussions are always in the foray. Where Hobbes theory says that Hobbesian always subscribe to the fact that developmental institution is always exist and it is good. But again, social conflict, they said that what is this developmental institution, which is all ambiguous. They have no agreement on that. So grabbing hand, no, if state is strong and can grab a lot. So they say that the developmental institution is itself is a sham and that they can actually use this as grabbing from people in private party. So most of the libertarian, that is the libertarian argument or subscribes a grabbing hand view, and the Weberian perspective, yes, the state is a strong one and it has its own role to play. So agree on institution, again, yes, they agree, and generally in the social conflict theory they don't agree on institution, and the grabbing hand they agree on institution, but they have always cynicism on this aspect. Weberian theory also says yes. And which view of institution? Now the Hobbesian theories of institutions are called efficient institution, which we talked about, and the social conflict theory, which is the incidental institutional view, is actually what is constitute the grabbing hand view, and incidental institution views again Weberian falls under this category. So now there is always a mixed understanding of the development of institution in the behavior of the people or the overall development of the social structure. So this is what is actually the theoretical whatever muddling, I would say, because there is no clear-cut view which is consistently say that this is actually goes this direction, because there is always a historical and real overlapping of different facts and figures. Therefore, you always may not be go in a unidirectional way, because that may lead you nowhere sometimes. So theoretically you may be having an overlapping existence in that context. Therefore it is natural that there is a possibility of sort of uh, mixing up. So this is what is we have seen in the and the present the case which we did, talked about the institution and its role in development or developmental activity. So what is our concern now? If that is the case, what we are going to do today is the rest of the day is actually to talk about the tools which we apply in this sort of game or understanding this concept. So probably the most important single economic concept we will use in this class is the notion of efficiency, as Posner was making. But because that view is having more footing in one sense, that is from an economic perspective, understanding economics in an objective line. But at the same time, we are not subscribing to that fact completely, because there are other concerns which is law interested in, and the objective any legislation meant for. All right, it is not it is not mechanical at all, or very mechanically objective at all. So these are the things which makes a slight differences and diversion from the perspective of inefficiency. But we will discuss that in the subsequent lecture. The first goal is therefore define efficiency, understand what it is and what it is not. Think about whether efficiency is a good normative goal for a legal system, etc. So at various point in the semester we will see aspect of the law that appears to be efficient, and that is element of the existing law that appears to lead to efficient outcome and may even appear to be designed to achieve efficiency. And at the end of the semester or end of the lecture of all this, we will ask the question of whether we should expect the law to naturally be efficient or at least evolve towards being more efficient over time. But for now, we will stick to the question, what is efficiency and do we want it? Now let us go to the very typical way of analysis of efficiency, and this framework or law in economics course, that is normally we all of you know that the single most important tool which we talk is actually Pareto efficiency in the economic analysis. So a Pareto improvement is and Pareto efficiency is a situation where you achieve a state and that state is actually non-alterable. So in a simple sense, it comes with a definition that Pareto efficiency or optimum is actually a situation where you cannot make a decision, altering a decision, but to make a person better or without making the other person worse off. So it's very simple. So a Pareto improvement is, now at the same time you have a different thing, that is if you have a possibility that a person can get better without actually worsening the other person, then you can say that there is a possibility of an improvement. But that Pareto improvement is not necessarily with that of the earlier point, that is in the state A to B is Pareto improvement, then state A is obviously and certainly not efficient one, or neither optimal. So that is a kind of clarity which we have to keep in mind. So Pareto improvement is any change to the economy which leaves everyone at least as well off and someone strictly better off. Alright, that implies that the state A is actually not efficient when you compare with the state B. Why? Because there is a room for somebody to better. So if there is a room for somebody to better, means that the efficiency in the state B is a better better one to than that of the situation A. So this is what is actually the difference. This is what is actually the kind of analytical rigor which brought out by Pareto. Example, you prefer 3,500 to your car, I prefer your car for 3,500. I buy it for 3,000, Pareto improvement. Okay. So an outcome is Pareto superior to another, or Pareto dominates it if the second is Pareto improvement over the first one. So then you can say that things are different. So unfortunately, Pareto superiority is not that useful for evaluating a legal system. Why? Because Pareto improvements are win-win situations. Nobody is worse off than the other. If a proposed policy change were a Pareto improvement, nobody would have any reason to oppose it. If put to a vote, it would pass unanimously. This is what. And if something is a Pareto improvement, it is pretty easy to make that choice, or that case it's a good thing. So this is what is called the unanimity condition, which is developed in social choice theory. So Pareto efficiency or Pareto superiority is called the unanimity condition, where nobody is going to oppose, because anyway somebody is going to better, and without actually making the other. So if that is the case, then the first one is completely Pareto inferior, because inferior means it is not necessarily efficient. Alright. So however, the world is a complex place, and most new laws create some winners and some losers. So the Pareto criteria usually can't tell us whether one policy is better than the other. Even the car example might not be a true Pareto improvement. If the car is ugly and I park it on the street, maybe my neighbor are a little bit worse off after I buy it from you. So if I drive the car more than you would have, the sale leads to more air pollution in that context. So things are going to be different. So we need another way to compare outcomes rather than sticking upon the Pareto context, because the Pareto context, again, to be clear about the person who are not familiar with, Pareto is a situation. It is actually a situation of a givenness. All right, or in a static state only you can apply Pareto, not in a dynamic state, because there is a lot of problem with the conceptualization and the outcome. Because the simple most view in this regard is that every given situation is a Pareto efficient one, because every what is ultimately a Pareto speak is actually, it speaks about a pie. All right, if I have a cake and two individuals are existing now, no matter what you do, I can't increase the size of the pie. What I can do is actually I can share the pie. So Pareto efficiency talks about only whether I have completely distributed the pie. But at the same time, it never speaks that who gets what. No matter who gets what, the only concern is that whether the pie is being distributed, whether one person is having 1% and the other person had 99%, doesn't matter. For Pareto's efficiency, the pie is already been distributed completely. So now if you want to improve the person, that is 1% person, you have to definitely take the pie, the portion from 99%. In that sense, you are making the person worse off and making the other one better off. Now this is what is actually the kind of understanding. So in every given situation, if there is a distribution that is therefore said to be Pareto efficient, which is therefore makes no room to basically move from A to B and rationalize that A and B is different. Unlike you just assign the value and you play the value in their mind. So I think that is the problem with it. And therefore Pareto efficiency is good for an ideal theoretical as well as a evaluative point of an static equilibrium, not necessarily a dynamic equilibrium. But the real world, every point we produce, every point we change, every point we move from state A to B or B to C or C to D. So we keep actually moving. For example, when we speak about development, growth, improvement of society, what we say that is actually we are moving from state A to B, B to C, C to D, etc. So if that is the case, then you cannot any longer speak about actually a tool which applies in a static framework, where it see only whether that is efficient or not within that structure. It won't actually compare possible to have an intergenerational, interpersonal, interstate comparison in that sense. So there comes the proposition of Kaldor, very important, and later Hicks was developed that, and of course it is fundamentally the Kaldor a choice. Now what if Kaldor's proposal is that definitely everybody move from one place. So the whole discussion of development, growth, improvement, social well-being, etc. are moving from one state to the another state. So a choice that is complete, continuous and non-satiation, then informally a Kaldor-Hicks improvement is any change to the economy which increases the total value achieved by everyone in the society. So where the value some gets from something is measured by their willingness to pay for it. Going back to the car example, suppose your car is worth 3,000 to you and 4,000 to me. Government sees your car and gives it to me. I am better off, you are worse off. But since I value the car more than you, this is Kaldor improvement. So you may not be liking it, but this is how it has been understood. So a Kaldor-Hicks improvement is any change to the economy which could be turned into a Pareto improvement by moving money around. These are also known as potential Pareto improvements. So unlike a Pareto improvement, a Kaldor-Hicks improvement can create some winners and some losers. Whereas in the Pareto case, it is strictly say that it is not possible. So as long as the winners gain more than the losers lose. If I get your car for free, I end up better off by $4,000, my value of the car, and you end up with 3,000 worse of your value of the car. So 4,000 is greater than 3,000. So this is called the Kaldor-Hicks. So simple. So in a very simplistic understanding, Pareto improvement versus Kaldor-Hicks improvement is good for everyone. That is, Pareto improvement means it is clearly say that everybody in the set get better off. That means the pie gets bigger. That's it. So everybody gets better. So say that it is increasing the size of the pie, like from 1 to 2. So if I am getting 1% earlier, still I get 1%, the other was 99, but my 1% of current 1% is bigger than the previous 1%. So then that kind of things are called the Pareto improvement of that sort. Kaldor-Hicks improvement is good for society as a whole and make some people, whereas Pareto improvement says that make some people strictly better off, doesn't make anybody worse off, but many make some people worse. May make some people worse off and increase total surplus value. So efficiency in that sense is no available Kaldor-Hicks improvements, impossible to help someone without hurting someone else more. So impossible to create total payoffs realized by everyone. So this is very true, because suppose if I am saying that state A to B, I also assume that there is no other state exists. Now if there is no other state exists, how can I improve this situation of this state? No, unless and until we inculcate some value into the minds of the other. So things are going to be a little tipsy there. So again, this is true because suppose your earth is closed and we have nothing. So whatever we produce, which is also part of this earth. So in that sense, we are trying to improve by ourselves by taking from somewhere else. So, which is a Kaldor case, it is not Pareto case, because without worsening the other person, you can't improve in that sense. So, this is what is a kind of difference between what is Pareto speaks and what is actually Kaldor speaks. So, therefore, impossible to increase total pay of realizing by everyone. So, this is the point. And once we have done that, what is efficient is whatever configuration of the economy creates the most value. Now, there are in the law and economics, there are people who try to simulate this thing and try to say better, not better basically. These are two fundamental understanding, somewhat, altered versions of the same. So, our definition of efficiency: actions are taken when total benefit outweigh total cost, which is called goal is to achieve all Kaldor-Hicks improvement. All right. So Erikson says that efficiency is minimizing the objective sum of A, transactional cost, or B, deadweight loss arising from failure to exploit potential gains from trade. And where Posner say that wealth maximization is the goal. All right. And Polinsky say the efficiency corresponds to the size of the pie. Now again, as I said earlier, there are different views people had put out to understand the efficiency. Now, efficiency versus inefficiency. Compare gains to everyone in society, that is total social benefit, to cost to everyone, total social cost. Now, when people decide how to act, they consider the cost and benefit to themselves, not to everyone. Such as a private benefit and private cost. I will do something whenever private benefit is greater than private cost. This is what is actually from the perspective of an individual, and efficiency develop on whether social benefit is actually greater than the social cost. Now, if I was the only one affected by my choice, then social benefit is going to be equal to the private benefit, and the social cost is equal to the private cost. So when I am deciding which movie to watch on Netflix or any channel, Amazon, nobody else is affected by my choice, so my choice will be efficient in that sense. But when my choice affects other people's payoff, social benefit, private benefit, or social cost, private cost, so that is social cost, social benefit is actually greater or lesser than the private benefit, whereas social cost also corresponds, the social cost vis-a-vis the private cost corresponds in that line. So action I choose to take may not be efficient in that sense. This is leading to the situation which normally is understood as the case of tragedy of commons, because Garrett Hardin, in his environmental or ecological person, scientist who had wrote in 1968 a paper on the tragedy of commons. So Garrett Hardin's perspective is that if people see, this is a very important perspective, that is, if people have a private mind, like as I said, selfishness, and they respond to the incentives, etc., then the resources are open access resources, or say public resources or free good. People have a tendency to overuse. All right. So that overuse is actually leads to the depletion of the resources in an untimely manner. See, anything which happens untimely is called a tragedy. All right. If somebody meets an accident and then a fatal accident, then we call it as a tragedy. Why? Because the normal time duration or the life expectancy of the person is being bypassed by that particular accident. So we call it as a tragedy. So tragedy is something which occurs before the natural course of its end. So This is what is actually Garrett Hardin says. When you have a public property and you have a private mind, then what you do is actually you privatize the public property, or you overuse the public property, and the result is that it is going to be no longer a public good, or it will be get depleted very fast. So let's come to an example of fishing. Okay, picture a monsoon. This is a picture of a monsoon fishing at Vellayani Lake in Kerala. Vellayani Lake, why I asked this lake? A lake is a confined environment where you can say that actually the fish, the growth is more or less static because it is confined. If more people are going to fish, then the fish resources will be get depleted very fast, because it's an open place. A lake is actually open to everyone who resides in it. So the more fish I catch, the fewer fish are left in the lake, and the harder it is for everyone else in the village to catch fish. So my fishing imposes a cost externality on everyone else, so everyone ends up fishing more than the efficient amount. What is the result? Suppose if there is 20 fishermen, cost of fishing is 8 fish per hour. Notation is the following, that is H is equal to how many hours I fish. Capital H is combined hours everyone fishes, and capital under bar hours of everyone but me fishing. Okay, so my fishing minus everyone's fishing hour minus mine. So that is what H minus. So fishermen catch 260. This is a simple calculation. Any number, if you play with it, you will get an answer of this kind. So 260 minus H fish per hour is going to be the result, and we have some calculation. So what is the question is that what is the efficient level of fishing? How much utility does that give to each fisherman? Question number 1. B, left to their own device, how much will each person fish? How much utility will each person get? So we have the answer here, but let's go to the calculation. How do we found out it? So one way to think about efficiency is that suppose you were king. So you are the person who decides and could tell everyone what to do, and all you cared about was maximizing combined surplus of everyone in town minus what would you tell everyone to do. So if that is the case, then each fisherman payoff will be H times 260 minus H minus 8 hours. So if we add them all up, everyone combined payoff will be H times 260 minus H minus H 8H. So H into 260 minus H is total number of fish caught, and 8H is the total amount of time, effort or disutility spent fishing. To maximize this, we can take the derivation and set it equal to 0. That is, derivation is 260 minus 2H minus 8, which is equal to 252 minus 2H. So maximizes at H is equal to 126. So we maximize total combined payoff by having people fish a combined total of 126 hours per day, or 126 by 20, which is equal to 6.3 hours per day per fisherman. Okay, that means they catch a 260 minus 126 is 134 fish per hour. So each fisherman catch 6.3 into 134, which is equal to 844.2 fish per day. Get 8 into 6.3, which is equal to 50.4 disutility from fishing, for payoff of 793.8 fish per day. So that the efficient outcome is, if we tell everyone what to do and maximize their payoff, everyone in town gets utility of almost 794 fish per day. But how much will people fish if they are left to choose for themselves? Now my payoff is H, that is 260 minus H minus 8H, or H times 260 minus H of mine and my others without mine, and mine minus 8H. So that the derivatives is equal to 260 minus h minus 2h minus 8, which is equal to 0. And since h is equal to h under bar plus h, we can write this as 252 minus h minus h, which is equal to 0, or h is equal to 252 minus h. So everyone will fish the same amount. So h is equal to 20 hours and 21st hour is equal to 252. So h is equal to 12. So everyone in town fishes 12 hours a day. So what is actually h is equal to 240, and we all catch 260 minus h, which is equal to 260 minus 240, which is equal to 20 fish per hour. Now 20 fish per hour. Alright, so we each fish for 12 hours and catch 240 fish, and we each get a disutility of 12 into 8, which is equal to 96 fish from fishing. So we each get a utility 144. Okay, now so the situation is very inefficient due to the externality, everyone getting a payoff of 144 fish, whereas this is not the case with the early one. But if everyone worked less, everyone would get as much fish payoff. So this is what is actually the result which we said earlier, this one. So what is the efficient level of fishing in this thing? Now this can be depicted with this picture. Look at the hours of fishing per day per fisherman. This is maximum sustainable yield and the equilibrium level of fish and efficient level of fishing. So this is what is the graph looks like. So if you actually fish per 6.3 hours, then what you get is the maximum. See, that is 6.3 hours per day fisherman. Then what is you get is 793.8 fish per day. All right. Whereas if you fish 12 hours per day per fisherman, you get 144 fish per day. See the difference. So this is how the calculation says, because if you try to maximum sustainable yield and the private maximization, both are different. So this calculation is very important. So fishing imposes a negative externality on other fishermen. Each one ignores this externality when deciding how much to fish. So they all end up fishing more than the efficient amount and end up with an inefficient. Same thing happened with other communal resources like getting cattle grazing. In the Ronalco's paper of problem of social cause, he talks about the cattle example, cattle grazing example, whaling. Again, we had already talked about the example of whaling, overhunting, oyster beds, etc., erosion, etc. So Aristotle said that that which is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. So that is the idea which Hardin was trying to inculcate. See, if it is public, then so you give least value to it. So Elinor Ostrom, on the contrary, who shared the 2009 Nobel Prize in Economics, studied how different societies solve this problem, where she introduced a common pooled resources, where people actually pool their resources and they don't do all kinds of this tragedy, and they don't end up with all this kind of tragedies which Hardin was talked about. So there is alternative views on it, and again we will also end up with other sort of things. See, in the paper of Hardin, his conclusion was that to solve this tragedy of this public common goods or public good is to privatize, but that was contended by many. Now even after this privatization, there are a problem with the privatization. So this is what comes in the problem of anti-common, which we'll discuss later. So positive externality works the opposite way. That is, active which create positive externality are naturally done less than the efficient amount. Without some sort of regulation or intervention, activities which impose a negative externality will tend to happen more than the efficient amount, and activities which impose a positive externality will tend to happen less than the efficient amount of it. So one recurring theme you will see in this class is, if we want the law to lead the efficient outcome, we can try to design the law to eliminate externality. That means internalization. So with this note, let me conclude today's lecture, and I hope that all of you found this lecture very interesting, especially application of the tool and the logic which I discussed. Once again, I am thanking all of you for your patient listening. Thanks a lot.